probably talk about Bill Paxton here. I'm not going to pretend that I was the biggest fan, and I could probably name most of his roles by heart, but I do appreciate what good Bill Paxton did for what some consider low art.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
He never seemed too high and mighty in Hollywood for comic or horror roles. He usually seemed to enjoy himself no matter what project he was in. He's also one of the only people in history to be killed by an alien, a predator, and a Terminator on screen. And Agent Coulson.
Now, I'll be unstoppable.
Hey guys, I found it.
But I don't think that Bill Paxton's best role was one of his more high-profile parts. I don't think it was in Twister, Titanic, or, God forbid, Alone in the Dark. I think his best was in an underrated flick about vampires in the Midwest called Near Dark. Near Dark tells the story of a boy named Caleb from a Midwestern town who is bitten by a drifter that turns out to be a vampire. Once he starts to turn, the girl's traveling crew kidnap him, enrolling him in their gang of night dwellers with a knack for murder, mayhem, and arson. Caleb tries to fit in with the group but can't bring himself to murder an innocent, which leads to them almost getting caught by the authorities. After being rescued by his family, Caleb finds himself in a situation where he has to fight off the vampires and save his family before the monsters kill them all in revenge. This movie's got a lot of great combinations of themes. It's a classic gunslinger mixed with an old grindhouse biker flick. It's a dark horror that's mixed with a car crash road trip movie. It's a vampire western. There's only a few times where those words combine and still work, and god damn it, this is one of them. This was one of Catherine Bigelow's first movies. She'd go on to do other films like The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, but those were more recent. It took her a good 20 years to put out something that people deemed award-worthy. And Point Break. She did Point Break, too.
Fuck is going on? Ain't what's going on, son. It's what's coming off. Your face. Clean off.
But this was still a really underrated flick. Lots of cool set pieces, some amazing visuals, some absolutely gruesome-looking facial scarring and burning effects, and I also like that it follows the same format as a classic Western revenge story. Basically, it happens like this. The hero is wronged by a group of outlaws. He gains new skills and experience along his journey, and with the life of a family member hanging in the balance, he goes on to stop the bad guys and succeeds, making off with the love interest.
What the goddamn hell's going on, son?
I can't expect you to believe it. I can't believe it myself. I ain't a person anymore. I don't know what I am.
The characters in this are very hit or miss. The main character, Caleb, is alright, I guess. He never left much of an impact on me. I mean, the actor playing him is decent enough. He's got a few good scenes, and you do feel sympathetic towards his plight, but here's a tip. If you want to develop a character and have the audience follow them all the way through, do not surround them with Lance Henriksen and his crew of vampire rednecks.
How old are you?
Let's put it this way. I fought for the South.
South.
We lost.
The gang led by Jesse Hooker is so much fun to watch. Now, obviously, Lance Henriksen is great, which is a relief because he really didn't want to do this in the first place. He heard the words vampire western and thought it was going to bomb, but after he read the script, he thought, could be good. I mean, it doesn't hurt that he gets a lot of awesome moments in this.
For you.
Now, each member of the crew has their own distinct personalities, their own roles in the family, and the movie plays off like an old 50s biker flick. May is the caring matriarch with the bit of the homicidal streak in her, which is evident from the first scene where she turns Caleb after he does what's known in both the human and the vampire community as a dick move.
Just get me home!
Maybe I will. But you're gonna have to kiss me first.
But if we're talking about the vampire crew, we're talking about characters that made an impact and made this movie their own. This is where Bill Paxton shines.
Check out time.
Paxton's character is so insane and so much fun to watch that you can't help but love him as he chews up the scenery. He goes to pretty much every extreme you can have with a character like this. He's charming, he's dangerous, he's maniacal but cynical, and he's undoubtedly violent and terrifying.
It's finger licking good.
But never off-putting. It's always in a way that you want to keep watching this guy do what he does.
I hate to be
I really do.
But you disappointed me. Now you're gonna have to pay.
There's actually a lot of characters like that in this, not helped by the fact that there's actually 3 alumni from Aliens in this. There's Paxton, there's Henriksen, and there's Jeanette Goldstein.
Don't you want the beer?
No, honey, the drink's on me.
Damn it, Vasquez, we had food coming. And if you want a perfect, isolated example of why this movie's so great, and in particular, why these characters are so entertaining, you need to see the bar scene.
This is a kick, ain't it?
It starts off as kind of a bonding experience, showing Caleb what he could do with his newfound powers, but then it turns into a full-on massacre.
I hate them when they ain't been shaved.
And again, going back to Paxton, everybody's got their moments in this scene, but nobody really makes it their own like him.
You having a little trouble with your hog leg there?
That image of the cowboy spur being used as a weapon is the first thing that I ever saw from this movie, and to this day, I still think it's one of the best images in any horror film.
There's a fly on the ceiling.
And years before Interview with a Vampire would make this into a plot point, Near Dark introduces the concept of the child who's been turned into a vampire and longs for an adult life.
Have any idea what it's like to be a big man on the inside and have a small body on the outside?
You have any idea what it's like to hear about it every night?
He's probably the most sympathetic of the vampires since they dwell the most on his wants and desires. Mostly his desire for someone else to be like him, to share in the pleasures and the suffering of being a child vampire. Especially when the crew happens to come across Caleb's sister.
I'd like to introduce you all. Sarah.
Well, you people should stay up late.
We keep odd hours.
The movie has a tendency to play around with vampire lore, and it's pretty interesting. It abides by the same rules as most. Sunlight burns the creatures, they feed on blood, bites transform victims into vampires, but the setting itself makes for some really cool moments. Remember, they're in the West, they're in the desert, and vampires in the desert need protection.
Black out them bulkheads and fantail. The sun is on the rise.
Which is why they're always covering themselves. They shield up their car with aluminum foil and wraps. That's a really cool idea. And the scenes where they're running through the sun are probably my favorites. I love how their skin starts to smoke, and some of them, unfortunately, don't make it, and they just full-on catch fire. And as far as I can tell, this is also one of the first mainstream vampire films to play around with the idea of a legit cure for vampirism. In a lot of movies, the cure is either something mystical, like killing the head vampire and all the rest will be spared from the action, or science is kind of introduced and Willem Dafoe gets thrown screaming into a lake. I don't care, I still kind of like Daybreakers.
Eddie? You're a transfusion person.
But in this film, both Caleb and eventually May are cured through a blood transfusion, because I'll be damned, this is one of the only films I've seen where the family goes out to investigate what happened to their lost child, and they come back with the kid. But the blood transfusion is a pretty good idea. Get rid of the dirty blood, get some fresh one in, and bam, vampirism gone. I don't know how legit that is, because again, vampires aren't real. So we can't have a scientific study on this type of crap.
Round and round and round she goes. And where she stops, nobody knows. It's about time for that big old wheel to stop rotating.
But overall, I really did enjoy this movie. It had a great cast, some damn fine direction, a unique premise, which begs the question, why wasn't it more successful? It was only given a few decent reviews by critics, and it didn't even come close to making back its budget at the box office. I think two factors played into it. I think the mix of styles had something to do with it, because there are very few vampire westerns out there, and they've never been meant to be taken seriously. Billy the Kid versus Dracula, that's an actual thing. But I think this is the biggest problem. At this point in history, vampires in a unique setting wasn't really a fresh idea in the minds of the audience. In the 2 years preceding this, we not only got Fright Night, which is a hell of a lot of fun, we also got Once Bitten, which I just watched recently and I think is still funny, and Lost Boys, which is okay, I guess. I don't think it's meant for me. The thought of yet another vampire flick that was non-traditional and was going to put a modern spin on things, it was kind of overkill. And vampires as a whole wouldn't really be in demand for another few years, which is a shame because this was as good a spin on the genre as the 80s were probably going to get. It didn't have a Corey in it, but you know what? It had a lot going for it.
What you people want? Just a couple more minutes of your time, about the same duration as the rest of your life.
It's not the best vampire film, but it definitely deserves more attention. It's got a fantastic cast, an interesting setting for this type of monster, and enough unique twists and turns to make the overall story structure seem fresh. It was overshadowed by so many other movies around the time, but it's gotten a bit of cult following over the years, and that's only for the best. There were talks about having a remake, a sequel, some sort of rehash of the series as early as 2008, but that was put on hold because there was this other movie that came out that featured a human vampire romance that made a little bit more money than people were expecting. History will show us in a couple of years just how many good things Twilight completely ruined.
Line.
If you just want a good time watching a vampire movie with great dialogue, cool characters, and just an overall sense of fun where you didn't think there'd be one, you can't go much further than this. I mean, it's going to be bloody and Bill Paxton's going to cut some people up, but it's worth it. Next time, we're going to pay tribute to yet another fallen hero of horror from the past year. Man, 2017 sucked.